Welcome to the Space in Between podcast, a series where we will talk about everything and anything mental performance in a bite-sized fashion.
My name is Sienna, and as per usual, Frida is here with me. We are both certified mental performance consultants from Ireland and Sweden. On this podcast, we share our knowledge and passion for all things sport and performance psychology. This includes all things mindset, exercise, sport, everyday life, and insights into how we help ourselves and others with developing our mindset. All right, Frida, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about comparison.
One that is prevalent not only in sport and performance, but in pretty much everything we do.
Yeah, for all of us.
And since the beginning of time, probably.
Definitely since the beginning of time. As most things, there are an evolutionary reason why we do compare. Okay. We're not going to go too much into that because it's not that important. Well, I guess it is kind of important, but it's not that important right now. But basically, evolutionary, we had to compare to survive. Like which situations are helpful, which ones are threatening, how do I know if I fit in here or whatnot, etc. So evolutionary, that has been an important role. And we still do that, because we are social creatures and we want to belong in the different places that we seek out. And we do that by looking at what already exists and do I fit in there?
So basically, comparison is something that is built in us. It is unavoidable.
Exactly. But obviously now we might not need that the same way in like a sport environment. It's not to survive. Granted, we still want to fit in as people. So we compare to others to know, well, where is my social status in this group, for example?
Yeah, and I mean, something that is so prevalent in sport from the day you start participating is that you are compared to others. Even if you yourself are not consciously comparing yourself to others when you're like 6 or 7, And it's not in a bad way a lot of the time, but coaches are, comparing even kids to each other to see like, oh, this person is way ahead or this person's really behind, and that can be really a good thing to do as well, especially when someone is so young. Okay, we'll just help them out a little bit more, but obviously that continues then through every aspect of sport, and it's like one of those things that in a way it's obviously needed, because I think about myself, I play an individual sport and your performance is directly compared to your opponent based on the outcome. So it really is something that fascinates me, how it's just so ingrained in everything we do and how that can impact us psychologically then as well.
Yeah. And that can be both positive and negative, of course, like anything.
Yeah. An example that I have experienced from a lot of my clients are handball players. And something that's really prevalent is comparison and its impact on confidence. And this idea that I am confident when I'm playing people I know I am better than, or people who have not beaten me before. But then this idea that I am not as confident when I play someone who I perceive to be better than me or who has beaten me. It always leads to an interesting conversation, because if our confidence is based on that comparison, then our confidence is somewhat fragile.
Yeah. So it sounds like in this case, your individuals are comparing their skill level in relation to the other person. And if they have been successful in the past, they feel better because they think by comparing that I am better than this person at playing because I have been more successful compared to the other.
Yeah. But I also think it's true in everything, not just in sport. We compare ourselves to people and we might be like, oh, I'm doing better than them, or I'm doing way worse than them, maybe with my job or financially or where I should be in life. We're at that age now where we're like, I hate to say this out loud, but like close to our 30.
I am actually 30.
Yeah, I am still in my 20s. But, I'm sure a lot of people in this age bracket have an experience of maybe when you were 20, you felt like people who were 30 had it all together.
Yeah.
And then you get to this age and you learn so much more or whatever. But like if you're comparing yourself to others, it can make it either easier or harder to go through certain stages of your life.
Definitely. Something that we have realized, if we're going to talk about this now, is that nobody ever has all their stuff together. We're all just trying to figure it out. Stage of life.
That's a completely different topic for, I think, another type of podcast.
Definitely. You're the one that brought it up.
I know, but it's interesting how comparison, it goes into everything.
It does.
You know, it's easy to just talk about sport, but like it does go into every aspect of our lives.
Yeah. But I think even with that and going back to historically, and when we think about us as humans and evolving, comparison is vital when you think about improving and like copying other people. So when we are trying to get better at something, we might look at someone else, compare what we can compared to what they're doing, and then try to improve that. So we're modeling other people. So when it's being used that way, like that's an essential part of evolution as well, that we're using it in that learning way to help us with our self-improvement.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that it's, when we maybe say the word comparison, we might think that's not good, but like it's actually really helpful in some instances. And if we can use it in that way. So for learning, like you said, and also another one is for seeing improvement, even in ourselves. Me comparing myself to, I'll just talk about a very simple example. Doing a pull-up, for example. If I compare myself today to myself 5 years ago when I couldn't do one pull-up, I'm like, oh, okay, I can see that I have gotten considerably better at that thing. And that helps with like my self-esteem, my confidence. So like there's another example of how comparison can have a really positive influence.
On the flip side of that one, comparing the opposite of that. So let's say you were able to do something and then now you can't. So that's another one that's like, it can be unhelpful that way, especially if we struggle maybe with accepting that we are going to go through different phases in life. That doesn't mean something is lost. But that can be difficult if we have lost something, whatever it is. Let's say it's a skill, like a pull-up.
I even think about sport and like this idea that the goal in sport, and even as mental performance consultants, we talk about helping people achieve their best, but sometimes that can actually be an unhelpful idea. Maybe you have this idea of this one individual best performance that you ever had, and you're always trying to match that performance, which was the outlier. It was one day that you just performed above and beyond. And if we're always trying to go there or even better than that, if we're even like 1 or 2% lower, it might just feel slightly disappointing all the time. So it makes me think about compare yourself to your average, not the exception. I take an example that we've talked about before. I, twice in my life, have held a 7-second handstand.
I did not know where you were going to go with that.
Yeah, I know. So maybe 3 times in my entire life. And guys, I've been trying to do handstands for the last like 5 or 6 years. On and off, I want to say. But every time I kick up into a handstand, I even hold it for 2 seconds. It's not good enough anymore. Because I know that one time in my life, I held it for 7 seconds.
Yeah, that's actually so true for this whole week when we have been practicing handstands. Because every day after that day, you have not held it for that long.
No, so I can barely kick up.
You felt like you're failing. It's really funny now that we're talking about it in this lens. Yeah.
I've been getting annoyed at myself based on this comparison to that one time I did it, or I did it 3 times over the course of 6 years.
You were in flow.
But that's a very silly example, but that happens on a larger scale as well.
I think one of the key points that you're talking about right now is when it comes to, self-evaluation and even motivation for ourselves in what we're doing. It comes down to our perception and how we're viewing that comparison. Like it can be seen as something, like it can be seen as maybe something is threatening us or it's a challenge.
So what you're saying is it's all about how we perceive it.
Isn't it always?
Yeah. Something that I think we can't let slide, as in not talk about during this episode and talking about comparison, is the role of social media.
Yeah.
Because now social media is such an integral part of so many people's lives.
It really is.
And we're constantly seeing what other people are doing, how other people look, all the highlights a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And that means that comparison is constantly happening. As soon as you open your phone and look at your feed, a lot of the time it's that person can do that really cool thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they look like that. That's something that a lot of people can find really difficult, is navigating that.
I mean, we get bombarded with information through social media all the time. And like you said, there's this image a lot of the time of something is perfect. But obviously from, our own lives, this is, I guess maybe a way we can think about it and maybe challenge that is, well, that's probably not the truth, because we all know that our lives are not all roses and daisies.
I mean, I do think the more social media is around, the more we're realizing those things. People are actively talking about, not everything you see on social media is real, especially in today's world with AI and everything you can do to manipulate an image or a video or like the situation. So I think we are learning, but it can be difficult in a moment where maybe you see something that makes you compare to yourself and feel lesser than. It can be difficult in that moment to remind yourself, we don't know the context of this situation. But one thing that I'm thinking with everything we're going back and forth with here is one of the main things, and this is the answer to every podcast you listen to of ours, is this is what we're going to say, is to be aware of, how your comparisons are impacting you. Are they having a really negative impact, or are they, sometimes they're actually very helpful.
Yeah.
So being aware of that.
Yeah. And I guess that comes down to, well, how can we work with comparison? If we notice that it's something negative, it's shifting that perspective to maybe instead of thinking like, I'll never be able to do that.
Yeah.
Well, what can I learn in this situation, or watching this person? Like, what can I learn from them? So instead of seeing it as a threat, seeing it as something that I can get something from this. I can use this to grow. So then we're flipping that perspective. Because I even think, be a little vulnerable here now. 2 examples when I think about how this is impacting me specifically. It's kind of interesting in 2 different ways. So first, when we think about running and doing our half marathoning, our marathon training, and even now when I'm going to do an Ironman or half Ironman, my social media feed is just bombarding me with people that are doing those things. So when we were doing the half marathon, in my head, I was like, it's not that special. Like, we're doing this thing, but it's not that special. Like, everybody's doing it. And like, that's such a funny thing to laugh about, isn't it? The same way with the triathlon. I was like, everybody's doing triathlons. And now I'm going to do a half Ironman, and my whole feed is looking like everybody around me is doing a half Ironman, but that's not true. Like, I know it's not true, but that's the information I'm being fed over and over again. So I'm like, oh, it's not that special.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting, I think, in terms of that, because that is impacting me and kind of taking away maybe some of
sense of achievement really when you do it.
Yeah.
Like, you cross the finish line, you're like, no big deal, because everyone runs a half marathon.
Like I'll downplay it like crazy. And you have challenged me many times with this. Yeah. And I also actively have to challenge myself with this, because I do that. And it's because of that comparison and just the bombardment of social media and the feed.
Yeah, and I also think it's one of those things, because like, we have both ran a marathon before. So this year when we were training for the half marathon, like you said, Frida would sometimes say, someone would say, oh, you're running a marathon. And Frida would say, no, it's just a half.
Yeah.
And then I would say, the word just makes it seem like it's literally nothing, big deal.
Yeah.
But we were training for like 12 plus weeks for this thing.
100%. Like, so much time and effort was going into it. But that's just interesting in that way. That's on a personal note. That's how that definitely I can see that impacting me. And then on a professional note, and this one, I almost think this one is way harder to, well, one, talk about, but also kind of admit to myself. But I've said this to you before as well. When I am on our professional, quotation marks, on our mental performance Instagram page, I find that very difficult, and to like be immersed in that feed, because everybody we follow they're all doing similar things. So in my head, I'm like, oh, what are we doing? Look at what they're doing. Like all of these things, I have these doubts creeping into my mind. So I almost try to avoid being on that, our sports psych feed. And I find that very interesting that I feel that way, but I'm also very aware that I feel that way. So I'm also actively here, reminding myself that, Frida, like, they're doing a great job. We're doing a great job. Well, they're doing content like this. That's interesting. Maybe we can try that, but it is challenging.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, and that's the beauty of social media. Like, you see what other people are doing, which can be helpful, but also it can make you question yourself as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose that's one of the tricky parts, because that goes back to what we were saying earlier, that when we see that comparison as a threat and something negative, and that's what I was explaining now, especially with the sports psych Instagram, then that perception is negative to me.
Yeah.
And that's unhelpful. So then flipping that, okay, well, how can I make that helpful, right? So I even think another thing that we have talked about another tool that you can use is asking yourself, well, what does success mean to me? Because there's so many different ways to measure that as well. And in terms of maybe that work, it's, right now focusing on being active uploading.
Yeah.
We're really putting in a lot of work doing that, trying to drive up our engagement and getting out there more, because that's something that had decreased over the last year.
I mean, something that I find really helpful when it comes to comparison, especially on social media, is remembering that there's room for everyone to be successful.
Absolutely.
I think that can apply to like anything. Maybe something that a lot of people can struggle with is the comparison in terms of fitness or physique and body image. I think about that, and well, there's room for that person to be super fit and to achieve things in their physical domain, and there's also room for me to do that. And I even think about that with handball, because sometimes people will say to me, don't you get nervous when you're posting all these things about handball and like mental performance and physical performance, that like people could learn from that? And I mean, that's literally the point.
That's true.
And I think that like, if my opponent shows up at their best and I show up at my best, like, let's see what happens.
Makes a great handball game.
And that's something that I talk about a lot with other handball players too, or clients, is, if I go back to what I was saying at the start, when our perception of ourselves is based on comparison, then that can be really difficult. So something that I will actively do for myself as well is I can see their strengths. I can see this person maybe is high achieving, they're high performing. And I also have strengths.
Yeah.
I can also perform at a high level. And I'm not just talking about sport here. Like, other people can be absolutely doing amazing. And there's room for me also to excel. That's something I find very helpful, is like, I'm not trying to pick them apart or be like, no, they have weaknesses. Yeah, all of their things can exist. And I can also have strengths and things that I do well.
No, it's true. And having that perspective, once again, it's a different perspective, right? So we're flipping that perspective to something that can be more helpful to us.
And I think that's what it all comes down to. First, being aware of the comparisons you make. Maybe it's in your sport. Maybe it's the moment you walk into the gym. Maybe it's in your profession. So actually identifying, where am I comparing myself to other people?
Yeah.
Then is that helpful or unhelpful? And there's probably times when it is helpful, probably not just like a clear-cut line.
Of course
It's
not.
always unhelpful. It's always helpful. But being aware of, okay, when is it unhelpful? And could I see it differently? Can I bring the focus back to myself? Sometimes it comes down to like trying to, maybe not out loud, but internally we might try to tear someone else down, make them seem lesser than. But can I bring it back to myself and see myself in a more positive or strong way?
Yeah. I definitely think bringing it back to ourselves and the awareness of, well, how is it impacting me? What does this show me about what I care about? Why am I having these responses to scrolling on the space in between social media? Like, it makes me question a lot of things.
We're going to have an intervention after this podcast.
No, but it's fascinating. And because of the work that we do, I automatically will be like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
What am I noticing about myself? So having the awareness always, and then the points that you mentioned there, shifting the perspective. That can be, what can I learn? Or, bring it back to ourselves. And then defining your own success and what that means to you. So there you have it. Those are the three. We kind of went all over with this one. Yeah. But as you can see, it invoked some emotions for Frida. Sorry.
She's had to wipe tears away here.
But yeah, thank you for following along to another podcast.
And we'll catch you next week.
Yeah, well, actually, before we finish, we need to want to tell you about what we got going on. So if you're not following our YouTube, please do. We have a good few fun things happening there. Stretch for the mind. There's a performance journaling series that's coming soon. We're uploading some handball stuff, because why wouldn't we, in terms of performance. And then obviously we have this podcast, and our social media on Instagram is popping right now. So please head over there as well. And as always,
keep using
the space in between.